Now, just when you think you've read it all, I read this morning and I nearly fell over. Gender activists want scientists to stop categorising ancient human remains as either male or female because they cannot be sure how the deceased identified themselves when they were alive. They believe you cannot also categorise the race or remains as this contributes to white supremacy. The reason I thought this was just quite extraordinary medically, when you look at the bones of a human being, you can tell if they are genotypically male or female, and there are reasons for that. And I don't know what you may make of this, but apparently you can't call them male or female because you don't know how they identify. Let's talk to Candice Holdsworth now, journalist at Spiked Online. Good evening to you.
Evening.
What did you make of this? I mean, I nearly fell over.
I know, you know, it's so tempting to just dismiss it as utterly absurd, but it really does have an impact. I mean, this stuff is sort of spreading everywhere, and now it's impacting the way that we study history or even ancient history, and I just think it is such an impoverished way to look at the past. It's becoming such a self-centered ideology that just looks at everything through this very, very, very new set of ideas that's only emerged in, like, the last 10 years or something, and now it's trying to stretch back thousands of years to find relevance. It's ridiculous.
Well, I kind of agree. In fact, I think it's less than 10 years. Everything now seems to be affected by this. The fact is, so apparently this is a bunch of woke anthropologists who've decided that you can't tell a skeleton because you don't know how it's identified. Well, look, clearly, anatomically, you can tell if it's a male skeleton or a female skeleton. And apparently these woke archaeologists are labelling them as non-binary or gender-neutral.
Oh, it is so unscientific. I mean, this is one of my big problems with a lot of this gender ideology, is I think it's incoherent. I think it's incoherent philosophically, and I think it's completely incoherent scientifically, as if sex doesn't exist, as if biology doesn't matter, as if all these wonderful techniques we've developed for understanding remains, you know, with so little to go on, suddenly all of that is just completely irrelevant, and you can just stamp this very limited ideology on it.
I mean, we are in a very weird world at the moment, I think, and also when you read further into this report, European researchers suggested last year that a 1,000-year-old remains found in Finland belonged to someone who was non-binary. And the reason reason they gave, by the way, is they had bones around, because items around the bones, such as a sword, suggested they were male, but they also had jewellery on, suggesting they were female. That is simply not true.
You know, but that's also my issue as well with a lot of this stuff, is it's actually very stereotypical itself. It claims to be going against stereotypes, but itself is very stereotypical. So the presence of a sword or jewellery means that it must have been non-binary. It couldn't have possibly been a man who wore jewellery or a woman who wielded a sword. You know, that's one of my big problems with the way these people think.
It's a brilliant point. The fact is, men can wear jewellery, you know, women can wear jewellery, and the fact is, actually, it's irrelevant. How you carry yourself is all important. The fact is, as long as you're happy with yourself. I just think that the worry is that, and I was always taught that you should never retrospectively look at history. You cannot ever look at history through the prism of today, and that's what they're doing. Yes,
exactly. I mean, I studied history as well, so I'm quite passionate about this, and I always felt the best historians really try to empathetically understand the past, you know, understand it on its own terms, because it's not just about understanding them, but it helps you understand yourself as well in the context that you live in. And when you have this very narcissistic, self-centered way of looking at the world, I think it just narrows everyone's understanding.
And where do we go from here? What's the pushback? Because clearly this is carrying on. I have to say, by the way, this is from the Black Trowel Collective of American anarchist archaeologists, saying archaeologists must centre the fluidity of gender in their archaeological practice. I think your point is really valid. It permeates everything now. It doesn't matter what we talk about. We have to have this sort of gender debate. And I think it's completely out of proportion to the way that most people think.
Yes, it's really totalizing, and so that's why I think it's very important that we challenge it, especially because it is a movement that doesn't really brook dissent too well, which for me is a huge red flag. And so we really do need to argue back. It's so You know, I think a lot of people, when they encounter something censorious like this, you know, the instinct is to sort of step back. Ooh, what have I, you know, offended here? But we mustn't do that. You know, we must really, really, really present a robust, coherent challenge to a lot of this stuff, because I think it is anti-scientific. I think it's regressive, and I think that it's going to impoverish so many areas of study, which is so important. You know, history, archaeology, literature. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on and on.
And what do people make of your pieces on Spiked Online? What are they saying? What's the reaction and feedback?
Do you know, it's interesting. You know, a few years ago, it used to be very difficult to make these arguments. But I think now people are sort of starting to understand, you know, as this stuff is sort of, you know, been more in the public consciousness, you know, when it wasn't confined to, like, you know, little niches on Twitter, you know, now people are sort of like opening up to it, and they're becoming less afraid, which I think is really, really, really good. But I remember when I first started writing about this, it was a risk. It really was. You know, I mean, I had to really think to myself, you know, do I believe this? What do I believe? You know, is this important to me? And I do think people receive it well. I think they do.
And I think it's really important that we are allowed to say whatever we think. I think that open, honest debate is important. The minute that you stifle that, that is when you build prejudice.
Definitely, absolutely. And, you know, the thing is, I studied philosophy at uni as well. I did history and philosophy. And when I first left university, you know, I found the whole concept of gender fluidity quite interesting. But I think what it's morphed into now, you know, this quite dictatorial political movement that doesn't really engage with any of its critics, and it's become a negative force in society. So I think, yeah, we've got to be very brave when we engage with this, but I think we also have to assert our own sense of reality, because I think this is one of the problems with gender ideology, is it does gaslight in a sense, you know, looking at skeletons and saying that they are non-binary, you know, and almost daring you to disagree with it. And that's very toxic.
Well, agreed. And also, what message does it send to kids who are studying history? The fact is, you're saying that actually you know that a skeleton was non-binary. It was absolute nonsense, isn't it, really?
Yes, it is. It is. You have to enter into these things. You have to go where the evidence leads, you know.
Well
you have to go in with an open mind. You know, so that's what so much of history and archaeology is about. I mean, you might partially uncover a human city and think, oh, this was just for worship. And then you discover there are dwellings, and that changes your whole paradigm about how you understand what this was. And what they're saying is the absolute opposite of that. It's saying whatever you think initially is the correct explanation.
Brilliant. Well, so nice to talk to you. That's Candice Holdsworth, who is journalist at Spiked Online.